Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you all for coming. Let's go on back here. So today, again, thank you. Thank you, Civo, for having me come speak. There's a really great lineup of speakers here, so I'm humbled and happy to be part of all of them. And again, I always thank the sponsors. This comes back from my Linux Foundation CNCF days. Thank the sponsors because they're able to support an event like this and bring all this great content to you. So thank you all. So we're going to go on a little journey. It's an open source journey. We're going to talk about open source software and how it relates to the whole product-led growth model. We're going to talk about building a community and growing a tech community of our users, of our contributors, and of our advocates. And we're going to do this while we're staying true to what we believe and the core tenets of open source and being nice to our community members and respecting them. So, well, come with me on this journey, and we're going to kick it off with a bang, and we're going to talk about the elephant that is in the room, that is basically in every community builder's room. And it's the revenue elephant, I'm calling this little elephant here. As many of us, we work for a company that generates revenue, and they need to generate that revenue so that they can be developing new technologies, new open source technologies. But they also give back, and with my employer, they give back by contributing to open source projects, as well as having somebody like me who is focused on community and open source and not necessarily a revenue generating role. So we also, oh, look at that. Sorry, a little nervous. We also, so people in my role, we're here to help the community be aware of the technology, to help users get started with the technology, and also support them throughout this journey. So this is kind of that marketing and content stuff. Now, if we think about this elephant, if my company is not selling product at some point along this journey, then they aren't generating any revenue that is going to pay for people like me. And you may say, oh, well, big deal, we lost another marketing and content person. Especially some of our open source engineers may not be so bummed to hear that. But I want to challenge that thinking, because there's a number of us in the community that you want to keep us around, because we are focused on the community, but we also, spend a lot of time trying to understand the people who are using our technologies. We respect your privacy, we respect your processes. We want to make it easy for you to be using the technology. And I am never going to sell to you. There's many of us in the community. We are in our role. We are never going to sell to you, and we're not going to put your name, give it to our BDRs for them to sell to you. And that's actually product-led growth, kind of in a nutshell, where we have let go of the technology and how users are using it. We put the decision for the technology, we put them in the hands of the users, and in my role and in our role as community members, we're here to help provide the content and the community and the tools to help you make that decision, this full kind of end-to-end user experience. So I want to go deeper, just a little deeper into product-led growth and how open source feeds into that. Now, I'm not saying that open source is around to feed a product-led growth and revenue model. That's not why open source was developed. It has its own whole other set of benefits and reasons that open source is around. You know, the speed of innovation and getting the users to collaborate. We all know open source benefits, any of us that work in open source software. But the theory that open source and how it gets to be, where it's getting more similar to product-led growth, is that we're getting users to use the software. We're trying to make it simple for them to get started with the software, give them a hands-on experience with the software, and as a benefit to the project, it ends up growing in the ecosystem. So we all are going to laugh at this picture I made this morning. So this is what happens when you do your graphics the day of your presentation. You know, I wanted to dig just a little bit deeper in open source. I I could ask you to raise your hands, but I can't see anything with the lights. But I don't know how many of you are familiar with open source, but when you have an open source project, it's either part of a foundation or it's just out there, right? It's just somewhere in the universe, just out there. And then you have a group of users and contributors that are contributing back to the project or using the project. But my point with this is that those users and contributors are often part of that out there, which is a corporation. And corporations, they make this investment through contributors and through, as I mentioned, people like me. They make this investment, but they end up putting services around a project to generate revenue. And that's the product-led growth model. And a little more, if you're familiar with the product-led growth, it's similar to what I've just been describing, is that you go from evaluate, activate, adopt, advocate, and it's the 5 user segments from not knowing anything to knowing a lot, and the whole goal, optimize your experience. So there's your lesson in product-led growth for the day. So we're going to continue along our journey, but I want to emphasize that we're going to take on this journey. It's a journey with integrity and respect, with openness and transparency, where we are collaborative, where we encourage innovation, where we have a shortened time to value. And these actually are the key tenets to open source. And we're here as community members. We're here to help you along that journey and help make sure that you love the technology and you advocate for it. So does the open source project work fine for you? Great, that is awesome. You know, we have people working on the project as well as maintainers. Do you need additional services around the project for your environment? Super, well then I'm here to help you understand when you're ready to make that next step, and then help make that next step as seamless as possible. And that's what our community efforts are going to do. Oh, there we go. So the very first thing, why build a community? There's a lot of textbook answers out there on why build a community. You can find, there's probably, most of them have 10 to 12 reasons why you build a community, such as customer support, such as awareness, brand recognition, for example, bringing people together with like interests. And there's nothing wrong with those answers, but we really need to go down the next level and define our why. And truly, it'll often truly relate back to your business benefit. So, for example, recruiting. You're building a community because you need good engineers. So you're going to build a community so you can find those people and bring them into your organization. You build a community because you want to gather user feedback. Here we're going to slide back into that whole product-led growth idea. You're building a community to encourage project use or potentially getting people into a free trial of your product. And you're building a community to give people the opportunity to try the technology before they buy. But the one thing, you need to define your why, but you also need to align that why back to your organizational goals. There is a caveat here that sometimes your leadership may ask you to do things as you're building a community that may not necessarily fit with the good tenets of community. And that's where you need to give a little gentle pushback, do some managing up, and do some education. Because community efforts should never be about selling. They really should be about helping users with the technology. But to summarize, you need to define your why and why you're building a community. So I have a couple examples. I have 3 different examples. They are all based on real companies. I have talked to individuals and built out these use cases, but I do not talk about what the company it is. So if you think you see yourself, okay, but it's not you, because none of you are in the room. I know that. So anyway, we're going to continue along our journey. And the first one is an organization that is building and relaunching the community. And they have gotten their community, they kind of acquired it through some acquisitions, through some company acquisitions. And with many acquisitions, you know, certain things were left to were not nurtured, not taken care of, and one of those was the community. So this organization made a shift in their strategy to prioritize building a community and prioritize their open source project. But at the same time, the leadership didn't really know what that meant. And they don't know what building a community really is. So the community team got together and talked about, well, what would be of most value to the organization as we're rebuilding, kind of relaunching our community. And they came up with, one is gathering user feedback. So talking to people and gathering feedback on open source project features, on the UI, on documentation, things like that. As well as they saw that it was really missing a lot of content that was really needed to take the user along that journey and make it easy for them to use the project. So they focused on those two goals. They had some super simple measures, such as number of user interviews, create a playbook for that user journey with documentation and content and web experience. They wanted to grow the number of contributors to the open source project, and they also wanted to launch and engage on at least one community platform. So in this case, they identified some simple things they were going to do and simple measures that they could report back up to leadership on what they had gotten done. And with this example, I included a couple quotes because that would be of really good value to leadership. When the users come and start saying something, and I love this one, saying you have secret sauce makes you look ridiculous. You know, these are the kind of quotes that when somebody outside of your organization says something to you, these are really valuable. So they gathered these kind of quotes and made it available to the product and marketing teams. So the second example is an organization that had an open source project. They had contributed a lot to this open source project, but it wasn't really gaining the traction and adoption that they had hoped for. From a technology standpoint, this project was getting ready to cross the chasm, but users are not using it. Like, what if I bring it in my environment, and what if it breaks something? And is it going to play nice with the other software that we have in our environment? So they focused on end user use cases and proof points. And they focused on gathering how people were using it, what business problem they were solving, what kind of technology problem were they trying to solve in their environment. And then I might have already said proof points, but they were gathering the proof points on what this is. And through this, they created these case studies, typical case studies, and snackables, and put these proof points on snackables and on slides, and then promoted it via social media, and they talked about it at events. Now, the users wanted to participate because there was something that they were offering, giving back to the users as they participated, and it was maybe access to the leadership and product team so that they could give direct feedback on the features that they wanted to see in the open source project. Maybe they would give them like training credits. They gave back things of value that would help them bring the technology in their environment better and use it easier. So the measure here was, again, simple. It was the number of case studies written, the number of times that they were presenting this at events, and the numbers of organizations that were participating in the product feedback. So they were trying to cross the chasm with the technology, and they focused on what they needed with the community to do that. And then our third example is what they call, actually, adoption-led strategy. I really like this. I might use this and change it from using PLG that we're using in our organization. But they already had a really strong community. They had a strong community around the open source project usage. And their open source project was wrapped around Kubernetes. It was wrapped around a very popular open source project. And their goal was to drive adoption of this ease of use tool for Kubernetes. So the more people that use their open source and free version, their theory, the more revenue that they would that they would be able to bring into the organization. And again, these are community people, so they were not selling, but so they moved from just engaging on Twitter and on Slack and at events to getting hands-on the technology, hands-on labs, offering a whole set of education and training around their open source project, and having hands-on activities at event. And it was all about showing the user how fast and easy they could get started with the open source project. Now, if the user needed that extra level of support, that enterprise level support wrapped around the open source project, great. They were going to move them with the conversations with the people they needed to have those conversations with, to talk about the project, moving the project over into the paid version, and getting them set up with a supported model that made sense for them. So their measures, very, very simple: number of courses they produced, the number of live events and hands-on labs, and the number of enrollments. And what's really interesting about this team is that they're moving from the community and open source efforts to talk marketing funnel are typically top of funnel. We're all about awareness and giving people content, and that's it. And they were moving into the middle of the funnel, which is where you're identifying people that could be potential customers and making it easy for them to use the technology. Now, they're not handing them over. They were just making it easy for them to identify if they're a candidate for the paid version. So with that, I pulled this tweet out. This tweet came out over the weekend as I'm finishing up my presentation. It supports our coming back to our elephant. Your community plan does not have to be this grand plan from nothing to greatness. That's what I tried to show in these examples. And if you get back to why are you building your community? What are your gaps, and what are those incremental steps that you can take? And when you accomplish that, what's the next thing you're going to move on that's of value, that's going to provide value back to your organization? Now, again, our revenue elephant, community should not be about driving revenue. It always should be about supporting the users, providing what they need, giving them a voice to be heard. But your community efforts should always be supporting your organizational goals, which are often to drive revenue. So with that, I'm done. And I'm going to take questions, because that's way easier than speaking. Questions? Oh, I'm getting filmed. Oh, good, we got,
Two.
Okay, great points. I'm curious if you're sustaining this community, which kind of is coexisting between business and open source, and in the middle you got a bit of developers and bit of people who are non-developers. How do you manage when one of them crosses the line?
when one of them crosses
this line of coexistence, like as developers, I believe in building something. I don't care whether people use it or not. It's fun. But as a businessman, I want to make money. It has to justify. We have limited resources. What happens one of them crosses the line, like how we are seeing with Terraform, with the business license, or the other way? Like, how do you make sure that does not happen, or they coexist peacefully, or how do you handle that?
Yeah. So how do I keep one of my team members from crossing that line? Basically, yeah. I threaten them. No, I'm kidding. It's about education. And as my background, I didn't go into this. My background was Linux Foundation for a long time. So I've been in open source, pure open source for a long time. And it's really about education and educating your team members as well as your leadership to trust this use model into revenue. And that's hard, right? Because they want to be like, I want the leads from KubeCon and I want to hand them the sales. And I'm like, no, you're not going to do that. You need to trust that we can nurture people with content and giving them what they need. So it's about education and then coming back to those baby steps. Like, what can I show you with my leads from KubeCon, for example? How can I show you what I'm going to do with them? And how can we track that to show that some people will naturally, through the content, turn into a marketing qualified lead? So it's educating on the process, putting and telling them how you're going to do it and how you're going to track it. But it is hard because they do want to sell.
We have another question.
Okay?
Hello. So this might be controversial, and I apologize in advance. I think we had communities, and then people realized we could make money out of communities. And then DevRel and PLG kind of evolved into this is how we market to developers. Are we looking at like the cynicism coming in and now thinking about how we evolve to the DevRel 2.0 maybe?
You know, I love this question. Yeah, I love this question, and I may not have made a big enough point on the slide, the one where after I've lost my job because we haven't sold anything, that there are people that do this well and do it, let's just call it right. They do it right, and they don't sell. And I do have marketing in my title, which makes a difference. So I think that myself and others like me in the community, we need to walk the walk, and that I will never sell to you. I mean, I was at another big company, check my LinkedIn profile for a short 6 months because that was precisely what they were asking me to do, and I was not going to ruin my career and however many years I've been in this to start selling to developers. And so it comes back to, you know, educating leadership that we don't need to sell to them. We just need to make the content available to them. Now, some organizations aren't going to get that, right? They're going to be like, nope, I got to sell, got to sell, got to sell. And they don't understand or trust this technology use model and people being able to make decisions for themselves. And if you're in an organization like that and you don't want to sell to developers, then you need to leave your job and go somewhere where they are going to trust that process. So that's why the elephant in the room. And I know I'm kind of coming out, and I'm going to have, I'm sure I'm going to get some hate tweets at me because I'm now saying that I need to generate revenue from open source projects. But we need to do it thoughtfully. Does that answer? Okay.
We have more.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. I wonder, especially when you talk about like company size like open source and maintain open source, I wonder, where do you draw the line between someone who is kind of like a volunteer and someone that is doing like free labor? And what I mean by that is like, how do you know like this is kind of like a very healthy environment, and this is like maybe too much, and probably we need to stop you from doing more contributions?
Oh, wow. That's a good question, a good one to just get me in all kinds of trouble. How do you distinguish between free labor and people working on open source? So let me clarify. Is it somebody who wants to spend all their time doing things that may not align back to the company, but are doing it for personal growth, and then their boss is like, why are you doing this? Is that kind of where you're...
I think it's someone who might get too involved in a project so that it becomes like their full-time thing. Like they're investing too much time in the project, and probably they are sacrificing other things that they could be doing.
Okay, yeah. So that's getting a little bit kind of into a manager-employee type situation. You have somebody who wants to do a lot of work on open source, maybe more than their organization wants them to, and that's a negotiation between them and their leadership, right? So for me, I personally have told my leadership that I want to be up here in front and presenting more. I want to be talking about this. I want to, this is where I want to build my brand, and they have agreed to do that. Now, if I can't do it all day long, right? And I think, frankly, if somebody wants to do open source all day long, they should probably look at going to work for a Linux Foundation or CNCF and be one of their developer advocates, frankly. Because I don't know any organization that will let somebody just do open source and not do things that benefit the organization. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's a tough one. So we think...
Any more?
We We have 30 seconds, and then I'm also going to be back there if we want to talk community at all. Thank you.
Can we give Kim a round of applause? Thank you, Kim.